The fourth Sunday of Lent is always also known as Laetare Sunday, Rejoice Sunday. In Advent we have Gaudete, and it always comes from the opening verse, the entrance, the first words of the entrance hymn. Rejoice in the Lord always is Gaudete, and today rejoice that this Lent is going somewhere. We're going towards the Rejoice Sunday of Easter. So we pray with longing and reaching. When I was a lad, my father and I would go fishing, and in northern Wisconsin, and you had to learn when your hook and bait was on a rock, because you thought it was a bite. Everything was a bite. And then you had to learn, is that a weed? And then if you got a hold of a big log, you had to learn how to back out of it. Little by little, you learned by touch. Was it a bite or a bump? You learned it, and you never forget it. We'll come back to that. Our first reading today is from 1 Chronicles, the book of Chronicles, and it's about reflection that Jeremiah had warned the people of Israel, you're polluting the temple. You are not observing the Sabbath. You are not doing what's right. And finally, their enemies came, destroyed what was religious in Jerusalem, and took all the people to Babylon. And they're there for a long time. And they have hope, and they long for what they knew, either by history, their own history, or their children learned by their scriptures and by oral tradition, what it was like to be in Jerusalem, what it was like to be a religious people. And they knew it. They had it inside themselves. And then we hear of King Cyrus, who is a Persian, who is a foreigner, and he has conquered all the tribes and princes and kings around him. And he bumps into these people. They say, you don't belong here. You go back to your homeland. And may your God be with you there. And so they go. He is a liberator, a foreign to them. They don't know him, but he frees them. And then we have Zacchaeus, not Zacchaeus, I keep calling him Nicodemus. Those biblical names get in my way. Nicodemus comes to Jesus in chapter 3 of John's Gospel, and that's what we hear from today in today's Gospel, that Nicodemus really wants to know, but he comes at night, very important. He comes in his own darkness and in nighttime darkness, seeking the truth. And that's the last we hear of him during this conversation. He is not sure if he's got a bite or a bump, a weed or a log or the truth. So he longs for it. And Jesus has a long conversation with him. We never hear from him in that chapter, but there is a lot about light and dark, truth and not truth. If you're reading John's Gospel, going through it, the word light, life, and love are interchangeable. John is writing years after the Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and he's writing for a very specific community. And he has had this community, and people have left it. They were no longer followers of Jesus. They were returning to what they knew was true, their Jewish faith, maybe purified, but longing for the Messiah. longing for the truth. Learning what's true is an interesting experience. There is a thing in Greek philosophy called ratio seminalis, that there is a seed of truth that you're born with. And truth is beauty and life and wholeness. It's in you. And many times you will say, I recognize that person. I've seen that person somewhere before. I've heard that before. I can't remember when I heard that, but it's in me. There are things in me that long for beauty and love from the very earliest moments of our birth. We are born with it. There is a mystical saying that right before we were born, God kissed us, or God put his finger right there, and that's why there's an imprint right above your lip and below your nose. It's the fingerprint of God. Or God kissed you, and you are longing for that kiss the rest of your lives. Longing for being held, being in truth. And that's what Nicodemus is looking for. And the apostles of John, he's hearing it and speaking it to his community, and he's writing it. So it's for the community. And he says, some have come into the light, and some have chosen darkness. Amen. Remember that early in John's gospel, Jesus was known as the light. The light came into the world. And that's a reference to Genesis. And Genesis is the very first thing of God's creation was light, so that other things might be seen. Everything is to be seen, but darkly, dimly. I know that. I've seen that. I've felt that. I've heard that. I can't remember where. It's been in your soul for a long time. And Jesus comes as light to tell Nicodemus and the community of John, Jesus is the light. And you will recognize other things because you have seen the light. But he tells us because we are of darkness as well. Jesus says, Moses said, let the serpent be raised on the wood to heal the people. So this Son of God, this Jesus, is going to be lifted up as the final demonstration of the light that is the love of God for the world. But here's the thing. Seeing is not perfect. Because you can see something, you think that you can be able to see something else. You say, did you see the bunny in the yard? No. Oh yeah, I saw the bunny. Well, did you see the robin over there? No, I wasn't looking for the robin, I was looking for the bunny. We will try to see what we're looking for, but there are other things to see. That's what Jesus is saying as light, and what this Lent for us is about. To assume that you have an insight doesn't mean that you have perfect sight. You have a glimpse of something that you recognize, that you remember deeply in your soul. But because you see a little bit doesn't mean you can see a lot of it. Little bit. There's too much of God to be seen, too much of God to be comprehended in the tin can of your life, of your mind, of your senses. It's limited. And so the reaching, based on what we already know, what you know is not complete. The light is still shining. And the light that is in you by God's creation of you, the Creator, Jesus, the extension of creation, comes as light to tell you again and again who you are. Jeremiah tried to tell the people who they were and who they were. This is what you would do, and they didn't do it. And they went into darkness, imprisonment of their darkness. What Lent is for us is to assume that we know some things, but there's always more. And when we see it, we'll know it somewhere in here. What peace is. When I am doing life according to, not what Jesus said, like a rule book, but what Jesus said by saying, I am the extension of the Father's love that would even give my life to you as well as for you. Live in that light. Live in that love. Live in me. So watch for little things that tells you, that insight helps me see a little bit, but an insight, and I know I lived with the Jesuit Bernard Lanigan, who said, he wrote this big book on insight, and in a lecture he said, insights are a dime a dozen. I said, I can understand that. Insights are pretty cheap, but they lead you to another insight, to another. That's why the light is darkly and dimly while we're here, and we keep reaching and praying and receiving God's love to keep going. Not because we know, but because we remember.